Welcome back to Before the Day Ends. Well, we begin Book 2 today. We finished Book 1 last time, and as we turn into Chapter 8 in Book 2, we're going to be looking at a new literary element that Matthew's going to put in here to help us remember the Gospel. If you remember that, we said that very early on, that this was an oral document. It was read, people heard it. Not as many people read then as they do today. And so Matthew put in these clues, these literary elements, I'm calling them, to help us remember the stories and kind of capture them so we can kind of put it together in our heads. And it is very helpful, actually, to know where things are kind of located for us even today. Just as a reminder, in Book 1, we were introduced to several literary elements. In fact, Matthew uses them throughout the entire book. If you remember, he begins and ends with the same general theme. God is with us. So in chapter 1, he says, he'll be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. At the very end, in Matthew 28, we're going to have Jesus saying before he leaves, "Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." So this inclusio, these bookends, capture a major theme of Matthew, that God is, in fact, with us. Then we had this alternating book structure. We have 5 books in Matthew, like the Torah, and each of these books has 2 parts, a narrative section and a discourse section, a story section, and then Jesus talks about those things. So in the first book, we had Matthew 1 through 5, his birth and beginnings, his connections to Moses, and then in 5 through 7, we had his renewed instructions, his new Torah, if you will, where he goes through and he explains what he wants from us as part of this contract with us. We also saw the connections with Moses throughout, from going to Egypt and coming back, being rescued from a evil potentate. And then we had another one, Lord versus Rabbi, where Jesus says that, Matthew says that those who call Jesus Lord follow him, and those who call him Rabbi really don't. And so we'll see that through the entire gospel. Give us a clue to what's kind of going on. So that's what we've had so far. Now as we turn into the second book, we're going to get another one, a new literary element. So we're going to get started with Book 2 today in chapter 8. And again, following this overarching outline, Book 2 has 2 parts. Matthew 8 and 9 is the story section, the narrative section. Then Matthew 10 is the discourse section. So it has a similar theme. The themes are the same in all 3 chapters, but you'll see how it's going to kind of brought to light. Now, to connect the second book to the first book, we're going to go back to chapter 7, verse 28 and 29. Okay, at the very end of Book 1 and Jesus' renewed Torah, he says this, in verse 28 and 29. Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching. For he taught them as one having authority, not as their scribes. He taught them as one having authority. So we've already seen the connection to Moses, kind of the leader of the Jewish people. We've seen a connection to the law and the prophets. But now the question is, okay, by whose authority can he say these things and do these things? Well, we're going to see that coming up here in 8 and 9. And the new element he's going to add is actually connected to Moses. So as we look at these miracles, these works and wonders in chapters 8 and 9, you'll note that there are 10 of them. And they're set up in collections. There's 3, and then a break where he talks about discipleship. There's 3 more, and then a break. 3 more, then a break. That's 9, and then plus 1. So where else do we see this kind of clusters of 3 repeated to make 9 plus 1? Well, guess what? You can probably guess this by now. We see it in the Moses story. So in Exodus chapter 7 through chapter 11, we have the 10 plagues, or the 10 works and wonders, where God sets his people free from the Egyptians. And those 2 are set up in sections of 3, 3, 3 plus 1. And the last one being the Passover and the death of the firstborn of Egypt. Like the first 3, for example, are all used with Aaron's staff. So again, we have this 3, 3, 3 plus 1 in the Exodus story, and we have it here again in the Jesus story, 3, 3, 3 plus 1. And again, Matthew's doing this to teach us something. So what do the 3 in the first set have in common? What do the 3 in the second set have in common? And so forth. What is he trying to teach us in the way he puts these miracles together? They're not just random. There is a reason for that. So let's take a look at chapter 8. In fact, there's a table I've included in the notes And this table kind of outlines how this goes together. And you can see there the divisions by the verse numbers. Something else before I go on I want to add is that not only do these works and wonders connect with Moses, they also connect with the stories of Elijah and Elisha and how they're put together, and also what Jesus does, the miracles he performs. And the reason for that is, remember that Jesus mentioned twice in the New Covenant, in Matthew 5 through 7, twice he mentions that he has come to fulfill the law and the prophets. In those first two big sections of the Tanakh, the Jewish Old Testament, the Torah and the Nevi'im, the prophets, he has come to fulfill those things, the law and the prophets. And so we'll see Moses and Elijah are mentioned throughout the gospel, and Jesus fulfills the Jewish teaching and the Jewish Torah. So again, he's not coming out of left field. This is not totally brand new. This is Jesus renewing God's covenant with his people. Okay, so let's take a look at chapter 8, verse 1. When Jesus had come down from the mountain, that's the mountain where he had the renewed covenant, great crowds followed him. There was a leper who came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, you notice that he calls him Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean. He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I do choose. Be made clean. Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And then Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Okay, so in this first miracle, we have Jesus cleansing a leper. And again, leprosy was more than just a disease. This was social ostracization. I mean, you would be kicked out of the community, away from your family, away from your wife, away from your kids, away from your husband. You'd be away and living in a leper colony. This still happens in places in the world today where there are leper colonies. In fact, in my old office, I used to have a wall hanging there. It was beautiful, beautiful hand sewn tapestry, and it was from Ethiopia. And people would often come up to me and say, oh, that's really pretty, I really liked it, and they would touch it. And I would say to them when they did, I said, that was made in a leprosy colony in Ethiopia. And they would immediately let go, like somehow this tapestry had the disease on it. I mean, so there's still, even today, this social stigma of leprosy. And notice that Jesus, in healing him, not only heals him, he touches him. He reaches out with his hand and touches this person, which violates, by the way, Leviticus. It violates the Mosaic covenant, because you don't touch unclean things or unclean people. Jesus does that. But also, he risks contamination. He can get leprosy if he touches this person. And yet he's not afraid. He's not afraid of getting sick to show compassion on somebody. He doesn't let fear run his life. This person hadn't been touched in a long time. And maybe that was the bigger miracle here, was that not just being cleansed of leprosy, but having that human contact of touching someone, smiling at someone, making a connection with somebody. Those things are incredibly important. We can't forget that. So he touches this person, and this person is healed. And by the way, notice that we don't get his name. We get his disease. He's defined by his disease. And Jesus says, no, I'm going to touch you. All right, the second miracle. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him. And the centurion would have been a soldier who oversaw hundreds of soldiers, Roman soldiers, so he's a Gentile. And appealing to him and saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible distress. And he said to him, I will come and cure him. Jesus says, I'm going to go and cure this person. The centurion answered, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only speak the word and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to a slave, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard him, he was amazed and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown out into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, go, let it be done for you according to your faith. And the servant was healed that hour. So now we have Jesus healing at a distance. He touches the leper. Here he just says, it's done and it's done. Now this happens one other time in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus heals at a distance, and it's in Matthew 15:21. Go check it out. Look for a connection. There's a definite connection between this story of the centurion and this is the story in Matthew 15. Very important connection to understanding Matthew 15, which we'll get to, of course, later. But for now, notice that this is an outsider. This is a Roman soldier who's very humble, saying, you shouldn't even come to my house. Like you're a Jewish person. You shouldn't be coming to my house. You're not allowed to. And yet, Jesus is like, I'm willing. And yet this man shows such faith that Jesus is going to point out that this is the kind of faith he's looking for. And Jesus heals his servant, and this person was an outsider. Okay, so now we've had a leper who is unclean, outside the community, right, because he is unclean and not included. A Roman centurion who is an outsider, part of the occupying force. And so he's an outsider and outside the community. So we'd expect maybe one more story of an outsider. Let's take a look at what we get. Verse 14. When Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever, which means Peter was married, by the way. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to serve him. That evening, they brought to him many who were possessed with demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and cured all who were sick. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah, again a prophet now. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. So in this last story, what do we have again? The healing of a woman. Now, I can make a joke there and say it's healing of a mother-in-law, which was an outsider, but in reality, it's simply he's healing a woman. Again, this was part of this culture. This was an excluded group, and he includes them. So what is Jesus doing in these first three miracles? He's breaking boundaries and setting up new ones of his kingdom. That Jesus sets the rules for who's inside and who's outside. And what he's saying here is faith puts you inside. Your disease doesn't put you inside or outside. You being a Gentile or Jew doesn't put you inside or outside. Male or female doesn't put you inside or outside. All are included based on faith. And Jesus isn't afraid to set up his new boundaries. He's not going to listen to tradition. He's not going to listen to old teachings. He's not going to listen to opinion or even the mob. It's his kingdom. It's his rules. And he is inviting the world into his kingdom based on faith. And we'll get to that, what that means a little later. So now we get to the first discipleship section, and it begins in verse 18. Now when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. A scribe then approached and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Notice he calls him teacher or rabbi. Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord," again notice Lord versus rabbi, "first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." Now, we don't know who followed and who didn't, although Matthew maybe indicates that by rabbi versus Lord kind of paradigm we have going on here. But the idea here is that of choice, right? Who will have faith to follow him? Because it's not going to be an easy road, right? Jesus is going to be homeless. Are you willing to be homeless? Are you willing to put his kingdom first over all other things? That's the question of discipleship. There are going to be some uncomfortable boundaries being broken. Are you willing to break those with Jesus? Are you willing to accept the Gentiles? Are you willing to reach out and touch the sick? Are you willing to include people? Right? That's what's going on here. Are you willing to challenge culture for the sake of the kingdom and to really truly follow him on your daily life? That's what's going on in this first section. Because Jesus is going to shake up the world in how he redefines his kingdom. That is not going to be comfortable to a lot of people, especially in the Jewish community at the time. So, are you willing to do that? And I want to say one more thing about this, let the dead bury their own dead. I mean, some people say, well, does that mean Jesus doesn't care about families? No, that's not it at all. In fact, if you think about it, when Jesus is on the cross, what's one of the things he does from the cross? Takes care of his mother, right? He is dying. There's a very limited time of what he can do and say, and yet at that moment, in that pain, in that anguish, as he's saving the entire world, he takes time out to make sure his mother is cared for. So yes, Jesus cares about families. That's not what this is saying. What this is saying is, what are your priorities? What are your ultimate allegiances? Because if you put God's kingdom first, your family benefits. If God is the center of your life, if the Christian covenant, the Christian renewed Torah is how you live your life, your family will benefit from it. Your children, your kids will benefit from it. It's hard to do, but they will benefit. So we put the kingdom first for the sake of our families. That's what's going on here. Discipleship comes first. God's kingdom comes first. And because of that, your family will benefit. So, what about us today? As we go out in our world today, what is going to drive our decisions? What is going to be our first priorities? How are we going to see people? Because how we treat others and how we include others and show them Christ in our lives is our first priority. That is going to be miraculous for a lot of people, because that's the kind of faith Jesus is looking for from us. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time before the day ends.